Project Assistance, and Jim Colton, Practice Director of Portfolio and Project Management. I'd like to introduce our first speaker. Jim Colton has been in project management for over 20 years and is a recognized consultant and practitioner on both portfolio and project management. Jim?
Thanks, Dan. Good afternoon, everyone. So I just want to start out by coming clean on one topic here. We gave the name of revealing the secrets of Project 2013. What we're going to talk about today aren't really secrets. They're really more than likely just unknown or unexplored features and functions in Microsoft Project. We thought revealing the secrets was a bit more mysterious and would attract more attendees. So hang with us. But we are going to share a lot of good insights and ideas today. Some of this might be familiar to some of your senior practitioners, but Gus will get into the demo later on, and I think you'll find some ideas, tricks, or techniques that you haven't seen before. So we're happy to have you on board today. We've been a Microsoft Project partner for about 20 years, and we're proud to be part of the Microsoft family. Gus started the company in 1997. We've been a certified partner ever since, and we've implemented nearly 250 installations of Microsoft Project Server in that time frame. Today's agenda, we're going to talk briefly about some of the business and technical challenges and really reasons for getting better at project management. We'll talk about some best practices for planning and executing within Microsoft Project. We'll spend some time on mastering navigation and the 4 key views within Microsoft Project. Gus Cicala will go through a demonstration, again, revealing what's called the unknowns of the scheduling engine. And finally, we'll summarize today's event, and we'll share some parting gifts. So just to jump into, why are we here today? Well, what are some of the common business challenges that we see? And there's quite a few, but we're going to talk about just a few. Certainly, organizations need to make confident business decisions based on reliable data that's gathered from the projects that are in the portfolio. And, we're talking about typical project information such as budget information, schedule information, managing resources, and managing the scope of a project. It's difficult to make solid business decisions if you don't have good data. So that's what we're going to emphasize today. How do we get good data into the project plans so that we can roll up and summarize that information so that management and executives can make better decisions about the overall portfolio? It really all starts with the project plan and project plan management. Another common business challenge that we see is proactively addressing project risk. So many organizations have a risk management approach, and often, risks do get documented at the beginning of the project, but often we don't manage and mitigate those risks throughout the life of a project. And we're not really good at identifying potential new risks. So as part of project management and project scheduling, we want to be proactive rather than just reporting what's happened in the past. So as Gus gets into this demonstration today, he's going to talk about variances in our projects. So some variances are in the past. We can't modify those. We're only reporting out on those. But there's many variances that are forecasted variances, and those are variances that we can positively impact through business decisions that we make. Another common business challenge organizations are trying to address through improved project management is making sure that the right people get to the right projects at the right time. And again, this also starts fundamentally within the individual project schedules and resource balancing each individual project. we start to look at enterprise resource management, which is a roll-up or summary of all the base project plans. But really, it's a full-scale effort for an organization to manage enterprise resources, but it all starts with the data that's coming from the individual project plan. Finally, providing accurate project portfolio metrics. So executives, you've seen this day in, day out, they want to be aware of what's happening, how are projects progressing against their plans. So today we're going to share some of those ideas and thoughts to better provide more accurate and more up-to-date and current information. So we understand that the technology must be in place to support the business challenges we have. Microsoft Project is the de facto project management standard, and most of you are probably pretty familiar with the basics of Microsoft Project, but maybe have not explored some of the more advanced features and functions, or really totally understand how the project scheduling engine works. So we're going to get into that today. We're going to try to really show you how to get beyond the Gantt chart. So it's great to have a timeline view of your project and see how you're tracking against some key milestones. But really gaining full control of your project will not take place until you're really getting beyond the Gantt chart and getting into effort-based plans, balancing resources, managing variances, and other features and functions of the tool that we'll get into today. We're going to try to give you a better understanding of the scheduling engine, how it actually works. When you modify work effort or duration, what's happening behind the scenes within Microsoft Project, and why is it happening? Some of you might not even be aware that depending on the task type that you select, the scheduling engine is going to do very different things. So we're going to share some of those thoughts today and some insight. Navigating the phases of project management. So what do I do during project initiation that's different than I want to do during execution? When should I baseline my project plan? How do I modify and update my baseline? How do I track variances and proactively manage those variances? These are some of the technical challenges that can be addressed through effective use of Microsoft Project. How do I balance capacity versus demand? We talked about looking at resource management from the macro level, but many project managers really struggle to manage at resource level projects just at the project level. We're going to provide some insight in how to better do that today. And finally, in terms of technical challenges, how do you actually display the information that's meaningful to help you make better decisions and better manage your project? Gus will go through, looking at different views of information, how to add tables effectively, how to use filters to just see the data that you'd like to see. Quick overview of Microsoft Project Server. From a project management perspective, you've got Project Professional, which is the client-based Microsoft Project scheduling engine. If you're online, you've got Project Server in the cloud, and you've got SharePoint that works in conjunction with Project Online. Many folks, team members, and executives will use the project team sites that are built on a SharePoint platform to get information about what's happening with project issues, project risk, how to explore project documents. And it's also a great entryway for other stakeholders on the project. So it could be a customer or an executive that wants to understand what's happening with the portfolio or just a subset of the portfolio. And all that can be done through Project Web App in Project Online. What is the data model that lies behind the information that we need to extract from Microsoft Project? It's actually fairly simple. We're talking about 4 major entities that drive the information within Microsoft Project. Starting with project information. As you add new tasks, you've got task information that you want to store. you're adding resources to projects, and eventually assigning them to tasks. So we've really got information stored around these 4 major entities within Microsoft Project. And we're going to take a deeper dive into how to filter, review, and group information to give you exactly the data that you're looking for. One key for project management is obviously to understand variances and really, more importantly, determine what you can do to impact those forecasted variances in our project plans. And typically, the challenges revolve around 3 different areas. One is balancing the resource demand with the resource supply. Again, are my resources leveled? Am I overworking people in certain weeks or in certain months? Am I underutilized in other areas with other resources? So really getting a grip on, do I have the right mix and the right skill of resources that are applied to my project at the right time? We want to look at missed project schedule commitments. So what are the variances in terms of the schedule? Again, both variances that we can impact, and there'll be some that are in the past that we can't impact. But we really want to focus on looking into the future, looking at the items on the critical path, and exploring options to get my project back on track if, in fact, we are not on track. And finally, understanding budget variances. So we've gone through, we've estimated the project, we've baselined the project, and how are we tracking against our plan? We'll share some insight into, again, being able to impact forecasted variances around cost. What's the process that we go through to really make sure this all happens in a positive, effective way? Well, it's really around getting good input into the project plans. From a resource perspective, it's making sure we have the right capacity and the right demand. Right demand meaning, do we have the right estimates for each of our resources? Right capacity meaning, are the people actually available? Are they doing non-project work or administrative work that's going to impact their overall availability for our project? Transforming steps, as a project manager, we have to maintain resource demand. Again, making sure that our estimates to complete are accurate. We have to maintain the availability. Are we making sure that if people have time off, we've built that into our resource schedule? And then we rely on managers of those resources to also ensure that the operational work and the administrative time is what we plan. Because all those things are going to impact the overall availability of a resource for our individual projects. How do we manage the schedule? Again, we need a good solid baseline from the original estimate. We need key task updates in a timely fashion from our team members. And we need estimates to complete in terms of duration. So team members are expected to provide updates. The PM must manage the schedule and do the forecast in conjunction with our team. That's the only way we're going to get positive insight into what the variances are. Similarly, with cost variances, we need a good solid budget baseline. We need actual budget updates, and we need to understand the other costs of our project outside of the resources, human resources that are applied. Things like software, hardware, expenses. Transforming steps are obtaining inputs, updates, estimates, complete updates from our team members, and managing the budget, looking at the forecasted variances, and determining, again, what can we do to impact positively any forecasted variances. So we mentioned baselining. Gus is going to show this in a few minutes, but I want to spend a minute just conceptually. In terms of baselining, before we baseline, you're going to see there's no field content in baseline work, baseline costs, baseline start, baseline finish, baseline duration. Once we apply the baseline, that data gets populated in those fields. So that's going to be the starting point to compare as we go through the project and make changes. How do we compare against this baseline? How do we know that we're tracking effectively against the plan? What's the definition of a variance? Well, a work variance is the actual work plan minus the baseline work. Just a note at the bottom, an unfavorable variance will have a positive value in Microsoft Project, and a favorable variance will have a negative value. It's a little counterintuitive, but that's how Microsoft Project works. So you can see, I'm not going to go through each formula, but you can see that essentially you subtracted the baseline amount from the forecast amount. So in this example, again, cost variance equals cost, which is the forecast cost, minus our baseline cost will give us the cost variance. How do these fields actually appear in Microsoft Project? Well, there's going to be no field content until we apply actuals. So we can see there's field content in the work that's estimated, in the baseline work once we baseline the plan, but no content in the variance. Once we start to apply actuals, you're going to see that the variances do show in the correct fields in the project plan. Again, a positive variance, a positive value in variance is actually a negative. Gus will show you that in a moment. So Gus, we're going to jump into the demonstration at this point. I'll introduce Gus Cicala, CEO, Project Assistance.
Thanks, Jim. So I have a simple plan here. I'm going to start off just by talking about some of the. If I start with a brand new plan, let's go there. The most common thing people do is they start typing in tasks, and the first thing I want to encourage you to do is to not do that. If we think about, one of the things I like about the ribbon is it's organized into task, resource, and project, and I would encourage you to go to the project tab, because if I type in a task that says design solution, okay, it schedules it for today. And most project managers are probably, hopefully not, building their plan on the day that the project starts. Okay, so I encourage people to think about a workflow. Think about what I want to do in this demonstration is do a fairly rapid run through of a project management workflow. How do you set up a project? How do you plan it? How do you baseline it? How do you put actuals into it? How do you do a variance analysis? And I'm going to do my 450-page book in 35 minutes. So real simple. Project information. If we want this thing to start on Friday, May 1st, I say okay, and it moves forward my tasks to May 1st. If I pay a little bit more attention here, we can see I have the opportunity to schedule from the start to the finish. When I schedule from the start, project will calculate the finish. When I schedule from the finish, project will calculate from the start, or will calculate the start, I mean. Now that might look attractive, but the one thing it doesn't care about when it does this is what today's date is, okay? So if I say I got to get this thing done by the end of the year, I put in December 31st. It tells me the start date is 5/1. I put in, 100 tasks, and it tells me I should have started last February. Okay, so you see things, and I'm not suggesting that you should never want to use this, but certainly be cautious. It says all tasks begin as late as possible. That's what we call a default constraint. Okay, so the default constraint is as soon as possible. So what does that mean? Well, if I put a design solution, develop solution, and implement solution, they're all going to start on the first day of the project. Okay, so the basic thing we want to know about the scheduling engine is everything starts as soon as possible. Well, it's no longer possible to start on the first day when we do something simple like link these two tasks. And obviously, the task just moved out to the following Monday, May 4th. And if we double-click on this task and we go to the Advanced tab, we'll see that the constraint type is still as soon as possible. So if you were to ask a question, well, why did my date move? You can always ask the project that question by clicking on the Inspect button.
Okay, and what the inspect button is going to do is it's going to inspect your schedule, and it's going to tell you that it's auto-scheduled, and the reason it landed where it landed is because it has a predecessor task. What happens if I started it and type in a start date? What if I put in the 5th? I encourage you to read these messages. Okay, project will try to talk you out of what you just tried to do. Okay, why would you keep a link? Well, there's a good reason to keep the link. I'm moving it out by a day, but what if my predecessor moves out by 3 days? I don't want to lose the link. Okay, so read your message. You moved it, and these 2 tasks are linked. As a result, the link of the 2 tasks will not thrive to start. True. Okay, because now what I did was I moved that task out 1 day beyond when it could have started. It could have started. Now, I don't know why my link went away. And so we can see there's an extra day of lag here. Okay, and I got a constraint called this task has a start no earlier than constraint. That's okay. What's a constraint? You constrain the scheduling engine. You tell it you don't want it to do certain things. So let's go back to the other plan I was looking at called the the scheduling demo. Okay, so here's an example where if I click on scroll to task, it's going to bring these tasks into my view. And if I, for example, instead of putting in, changing this successor here called define risk and risk management approach, if I type in 2:14:13, it creates that appearance of a gap. Okay, again, I've set a constraint on here. The other thing I might do to create a gap between tasks is double-click on the link and say I want 2 days of lag. And now we see, now it looks like 4 days of lag. It's going over the weekend, so it skips Friday and Monday and starts on Tuesday. Okay, so again, you know, why are we talking about this? Because the basic scheduling engine in Microsoft Project will start all tasks as soon as possible unless you link a task or put in a date. And when you put in a date, by default, Project will set what's called a soft constraint. You probably can't tell that's a little blue dot there, but it's going to finish no earlier than, but it can still finish later. So by default, Microsoft Project will give itself a constraint that still allows me to move this out if necessary. If my predecessor task increases in duration, that later task is still able to move out. Okay? So that's just a little bit about linking and leads and lags. The other thing I would encourage you to do is be familiar with what I call lifting up the blinds. If you go to the bottom right vertical scroll bar, the base of the right vertical scroll bar, you see my mouse changes to a bidirectional arrow. I can drag that little block there and lift up the blinds and see some more details about this task. If I right mouse click, I'm going to see something called predecessors and successors. So now you might have noticed that some of these tasks have a lot of successors. This one has a whole list. So instead of trying to figure out where all these arrows are going, I can get a list of the links that I have to my task, and I can add some if I want pretty easily. I can go to an alphabetical list by using this drop down, or in this case a drop up because there's no room below it. Okay, and I acknowledge some of you may be familiar with some of this, but I want to make sure we build a foundation for how we get what we call the critical path. Right. So the critical path is there all the time. It's real. And before I do that, I want to introduce one concept that's really fundamental to this entire discussion. By the way, when I lifted up the screen, I can also go to View. When I lift up the blind, I can uncheck Details, or I can check Details. That's on my View ribbon. Okay, and that's going to give me some information about resources. Usually, the default usually is going to be resources and predecessors. Okay, so as I click on task above, I can see the task below. Now, what I want to get into is what is the critical path, and the definition of the critical path, many of you may know, is the total slack is 0. There's no room to move a task without moving the entire end date of the project. The critical path is the longest path through the network. There's multiple paths, usually in a project, but the longest path defines the shortest amount of time that project can complete in, move a critical task, move out the date, right? So before we do that, I wanted to just take a second here on this slide, which is really the fundamental of how to do things in project. my whole premise of teaching Microsoft Project usually is based on the idea that if you know what your outputs are, you can tell what your inputs are. And if you know what your inputs are, you know what processes you have to put in place. Okay? And the way we understand, the way I got to get sort of a PhD in the scheduling engine was by exploring. And the best way to explore the scheduling engine and to get to really understand and have it, you be able to predict what it's going to do, is to put a view in place that tells you what's going on. Okay? Now, many of you may not know that a view, in fact, is a combination of a filter, a table, and a group. Why don't we know that? Because there's the no group and the all task filter whenever I apply the most common view, which is the Gantt chart. Okay, so if I go into Microsoft Project to get views, I would recommend taking away details. I just double clicked on the line. Right mouse click on the name of the view. Okay, and if I choose more anything, it's going to bring up this organizer, more views, where we can do new views, edit views, copy views, organize views. Okay, so if I edit the Gantt chart, in fact, it has a table, a group, and a filter. It happens to have no group and all tasks. So we don't realize oftentimes that views, in fact, are used to operating on grouping things and filtering things. Okay? So I want us to be aware of that, because one of the most important things we can be aware of is that the Gantt chart has a table. If I right mouse click above the ID column, or even if I just move my mouse there, it tells me what table I'm looking at, and it says it's the entry table, as in data entry. So anybody that's used Project for any amount of time has probably noticed this default view that shows duration, start, finish, predecessor, and resource names. Okay, and the first thing I want to really encourage you to do to master the scheduling engine is to fiddle around with tables. Get familiar with tables. When we teach Project or in our book, Project Management Using Project 2013, we cover this concept here. I'll come back to the views and the tables. When we cover this concept of when you're navigating, okay, if you're using a usage view, there's going to be a left side and a right side. I'm going to go through this today. On the left side, you've got tables. On the right side, you've got timescale data. Okay? And we can zoom in, zoom out. We can right mouse click on the left side. The right side, we can zoom in, zoom out the timescale to see monthly, weekly, daily. We can also right mouse click and see work, cost, duration, baseline, all different kinds of things. Okay? If we split the screen, we're going to have an upper pane and a lower pane. But when we teach this thing, the first question I always ask is, if you're in the right view, are you seeing what you want to see? Now, let me give you an example. If I told you that the critical path is based on tasks that have a total slack of 0, are you seeing the slack field? And the answer is no. So the first thing I encourage you to do is get familiar with tables. Turns out that the slack information is on something called the schedule table. So I can click View and the tables drop down and go to the schedule table, or I can right mouse click here. Now, if you were just wondering why are you talking about the schedule table when I'm not seeing the schedule table, it turns out it doesn't have a checkbox for showing menus. So I go to More Tables. I click on Schedule. Actually, I do think the box is checked, so I'm not sure why it's not showing. Yes, it is checked, so that's interesting. Okay, so I'm going to right mouse click and choose Schedule. Okay, and what it's going to show me are the fields that give me some insights about how I can manage my critical path. How late can a task start without impacting the critical task? Well, let me see. If I have 17 days of slack, I'm scheduled to start on the 29th, but I can be as late as the 21st of February and not impact the schedule. Okay? How about this guide called Evaluate Current Systems? 0 days of slack. Gee, that must be critical. And there's a variety of ways I can look at critical. Okay? On the View tab, on the Format tab, there's a little checkbox that says critical. Hey, look at that. The bar's changed red. Okay? On the Format, there's also something called Text Styles. And there's flavors of text, and one of my flavors is critical. So I can go ahead and I encourage you to do this, highlight that, and say OK. And now I can really see my critical task. Okay? Even if I didn't have total slack identified here. I have a drop-down filter. I can say get rid of everything but those tasks that have 0 days of slack. Now, it kept the summary task. There's a way to turn that off, but we see all the detailed tasks right now that have 0 days of slack. Okay, so that's, and the other one, I don't want to be remiss and forget. By the way, don't ever forget to put this back on again. If you save your plan, you'll wonder who stole your tasks. Okay, so if you go here and right mouse click on something called the network diagram, simple view. Okay, and again, I encourage view, zoom out, zoom out, zoom out. Every dotted line you see here is a separate page. So we've got kill a tree, just looking at this very simple critical path. Okay, so this is formatable, and what's the point? Well, one of the points is I talked about constraints, and one of the great things about the scheduling engine is it allows me to constrain my schedule. I can ask project not to do certain things. One of the first things I would encourage you to do is ask project not to move your critical path unless you tell it to. Okay, so for example, if I change my project start date, our finish date is May 7th. If I change this task in January and move it out by a week, my finish date just changed to the 13th. Project was quite happy to move your schedule date out. Your entire project just moved by a week. You moved one task, by the way, the first task in your plan, and you're already off schedule. Okay? So what if we don't want project to do that or have it warn us? Well, I can constrain my schedule. What do we mean by that? Well, what if you had a milestone called target finish date? And gee, maybe I would link that to the last task in my plan. It must be May 7th. It's got 0 days of slack. It has the same finish date as the finish date for the entire project. How do I know that? Well, the other thing I would encourage you to do before you start banging in your tasks is set up your options. File, options, and on the display down here, we have a bunch of different options, and I would certainly encourage you to check the box that says Show Project Summary Task. The mother of all tasks, okay? Task 0. It's there all the time, but if you don't ask project to show it to you, you won't see it. So Jim says there's project data, task data, resource data, and assignment data. How do I see project data? I show the project task, okay? So let's go back to that critical path. The last task in my critical path is going to start on the 7th, and let's say, I'm going to be really generous and probably unrealistic and say, but my target date is the following week. We've got a week of scooch in my plan. By the way, I would encourage you to put lag in there and make that scooch go away. Okay, Jim talked about, introducing risk management. Certainly adding lag to your tasks is something I would encourage you to do. Okay, I've run many a project where I have lag between my tasks. The customer doesn't notice. And the thing that astounds me is they keep delaying us and we still hit the project and they don't say, what did you do? What was your trick? Right? So one of the secrets of the scheduling engine is use lag. Right? So let's go ahead and say we don't have lag yet. So we're going to have a target project completion. Okay? I'm going to double click on this task. By the way, is there a table that shows constraints? I don't know. Let's take a look. Nope. Oh, wait a minute. There's something called more tables. Okay? And if I click on constraint dates and I say apply, I can now see that everything has a constraint of as soon as possible. Okay? So I can go in here and say, let me change that. You could say must finish on, but heck, why force it to finish a week late? Let's say finish no later than, and let's say May 13th. Let's move it out a week. And watch what happens when I link these two. The last task in my critical path, I'm going to link these two. I'm not going to split it. I'm going to go back and click on the right button. Okay? So now, if I scroll over, or if I use one of my favorite buttons, scroll to task, okay, it's still sitting at what date? Gee, what's going on? Let me put the entry table back. Okay? Brought me back to the top, which I'm not thrilled about, but I'm okay. I'm over it. You can use Control and. That might be a secret for some people. Okay? Brings me all the way to the last task. and the schedule date is 5/17, but it can't go any later than the 13th. Okay, let's make something late. This goes 6 days, no problem. 7 days, no problem. 8 days, no problem. Okay, now by the way, it helps if I use something that's on the critical path, which I actually disconnected this from the critical path. So let's use something that is actually impacting the critical path. Okay, well, I'll just use the go live. Let's say go live goes out. 2 days, 3 days, 4 days. Project says, I'm trying to move this guy out. This action will cause a scheduling conflict. Task 62, the one I just changed, has a task constraint or is linked to a task that cannot move. As a result, the constraint or link cannot be set. Project will always try to talk you out of it. In this case, you might say, okay, let me cancel and figure out what's going on here. And what is going on, I love the picture. It's got this little crinkled arrow, okay, and it's going past the task after it. Okay, so it's saying I'm trying to move and I'm having a fender bender here. And if I say continue, I'm going to cancel just for a second, just so we can see the bars. So I'm going to scroll to task, so I can see my bars. I'm going to change this to 4 days. Okay, I'm going to say okay, continue the conflict, and watch what the picture does. Now that's not great. Okay, so now it says we have an unrealistic schedule. We have tasks going past my target date. You allowed that because you said okay. Okay, so Microsoft Project was saying, maybe you don't want to do that. And this is the point where I say close projects. Forget it. Now what do you do? Because Microsoft Project is not going to tell you how to cram 35 days into a 34-day schedule. Right? So we get this warning that, but the great news is usually it's not happening here. It's happening somewhere way up here. Okay? I have a critical task way back in February, 2 months before the project ends, and I add 2 days to it, and it says task 32 is linked to a task. You go, wow, I wonder what it's linked to. And the answer is it's way, way down in your schedule. It's on the critical path. Okay? So that's the critical path. Network diagramming. And oh, by the way, you know, a schedule is a schedule. I was taught the definition of an optimized schedule is everything that is known is put into a plan that works. And if you're not putting resources in, everything that is known is not in your plan, right? Or maybe it's not known, but it should be known. But the point is, it's very hard to validate that a schedule is doable without having resources and estimates, okay? So this is where we get beyond the Gantt chart. This is where the wheels fall off for a lot of people, okay? We can see I already got a mess here. Gee, what happened? Let me see. Overallocated. Oh, good Lord, how did this happen? So one of the first things I encourage you to do is go to the usage view. Now, if I have 100 tasks and 5 resources per task assignments, that's 500 assignments spread over 100 days. That's 500 with 2 more zeros on it. That's 50,000 cells of data. And that's what I'm looking at right now. 50,000 cells of data. Go figure out where the problem is. No, don't do this. Collapse your assignments. Okay, so if you go to View Outline, I'm going to hide the subtasks to get me just to the assignments. Okay, I'm going to take it out of days and put it into months. I'm going to click on, even on the resource, I'm going to click Stat Task because that's where small the task is. I'm going to ask you where the problems are. Okay, and there's plenty of problems here. Okay, assuming our capacity is 160 hours a month, I've got a couple of problems here. Jeffrey's going to have a bad February. Steve's going to have a bad February and a really awful April. I'm sorry, March and April. Okay. Henry Brown's not going to have a very fun April either. He's almost 16-hour days, 5 days a week. Okay. So one of the first things we want to be able to do is evaluate what's the problem here. And one of the first problems I see is that we want to use resource leveling, and I'd be very cautious about that. We've got a lot of questions about resource leveling, and I like to do what's called task leveling. Okay, here's what task leveling is. I've got a simple plan, okay, and I have a simple resource sheet. So I've got to have three resources here. Okay, and I'm going to start to assign them to my task. And what I encourage you to do is to assign these folks by looking at the bottom pane. Okay, or even if you want to get really fancy, you can actually open another window on this plan. Okay, and that's called the new window button. So I'm going to open another window here. I'm going to split this screen. I'm going to put usage on top, task usage. I'm going to put resource usage on the bottom. Okay? I'm going to arrange these windows. Here. Actually, let me do it this way. I've got this plan here. I've got this plan here. I've got them side by side. Okay, so now what I actually can do is watch my resources get over-allocated as I assign them. Okay, I'm going to put Joe on this task. I'm going to put Joe on this task. Okay, and what's going to happen is I'm going to start seeing. Did I put John on? I said Joe. Did I put on John? Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and put Joe on there. Okay, and what I've got now, if I scroll to task, is I've got on the same day. Now let's say I'm going to add a new task. Okay, I'm going to add Joe to this one too. Okay, and now what we've got is on Friday we've got 16 hours, and that could be a problem. Now, if you're looking at weekly scale, don't worry about it. Okay, but the point is there's a way to assign resources and see live whether you're causing problems. Now, by the way, you might want to be over here to see what your tasks are. Okay, so as I click on each task, or if I reverse this, I just put Joe on top here and I scroll to his view. As we're making assignments, we can see if people are getting over-allocated. Okay? This is a sophisticated view. It's not a secret, but I don't see a lot of people doing it. Okay? And what's the point? As I assign somebody, this is almost like if you go into Outlook and you're trying to schedule a meeting, and you don't know who's available. Right? So I can look over here and see who's available before I assign somebody. Okay? The other thing that's obvious here for some is a task type that we suggest that you change. I hear people saying they like fixed duration. I'm not going to get into all the reasons why that's not my favorite. But fixed work acts different than fixed duration. Let's say you spend a lot of time thinking about a 40-hour estimate for this task. Okay? And you go in and you change it to 10 days, and it doubles your work. I'm not okay with that. Okay? What I'm okay with is if I'm going to have fixed work because I'm going to increase the duration to 10 days, I want that work to spread over 10 days. And how can I see how the work is spread? That's called usage. And I didn't click on usage. Timeline, don't do that. Okay. So I got resource usage. Let's go task usage. I'm going to go task usage. I'm going to say view details. I'm going to see that when I took that 5-day, 8-hour-per-day task and doubled the duration, project held the estimate constant. Okay, and oh, by the way, when it spread it out 4 hours a day, it also did that from the project tab by default using something called the working time. Okay, so when I set up my resources, when I went to my resource sheet, and I added these 3 people, if I was paying attention, I would see another scheduling default that says all of my resources will be scheduled against the standard calendar. Dangerous. Why is it dangerous? Well, let's take a look at it. Unless you're planning to have, let's use Labor Day is a work day, Thanksgiving is a work day, Christmas is a work day, New Year's Day is a work day, even if it's scheduled on the 2nd. Okay, 4th of July is on a weekend this year, but many people will be off on the 3rd. Not in this calendar. Okay, I'm 1984, so that's cool. Okay, so the schedule really defines capacity so that when I'm looking at work over time, that's what I'm going to see. Now let me show you an example. What if I wanted to see, I'll make this full screen. I want to see my resource cost by month. Right side of the usage view, you're going to right mouse click. Take out work, put in costs. What are my resource costs by month? There they are. How about my work by phase? That's the usage view. Anytime we say by month, by phase, let's go to usage. Okay, I'm going to encourage you to do outline level 1. Here's my phases. Take out the costs. Put in the work. And there's your work by phase. Your labor burned by phase. Okay? How about total work? Resource sheet, total work by person, that's a table. Right? The entry table is the default. If you don't want the entry table, put in the work table. Here's my variances. Here's my remaining. Okay? And by the way, if I want to bring 2 projects together, I'm going to say new window. I'm going to highlight 2 plans, scheduling demo and scheduling demo part 2. I told them to bring 2 plans together. Here's my first plan. Here's my second plan. All I did was create a new window, and it created a virtual master schedule on these 2 projects. So now if I say outline level 2, here's a summary of both of those plans together. What if I want to link tasks between plans? Here's my first plan. Here's my second plan. I highlight this task. I highlight that task. I go to the task ribbon. I click link. And I tried to click link. I click link, and I now have links between the schedules. Now, what would happen if I looked at just this schedule alone? If I try to close it, do I want to save my palette, my master plan? I don't have to. Okay, now when I go back into my Gantt chart, when I start looking at my tasks, and I scroll down to that next one, I'm going to see a ghost task in here that tells me I have an external task. Okay, so somewhere in here is a gray task, and what I have is links between 2 plans. Let me see if I can find that one. I'll go back to the other one. This is scheduling demo. Let me go back to scheduling demo 2. By the way, this is the Windows drop down. Okay, so what we have here is a gray task that says I'm linked to another plan. So let me go into scheduling demo 2. I want to ask a question, and that is, if I'm ready to go, if I feel like my plan is ready to go, when I'm going to start tracking against that plan. Okay, the question is, how do I start tracking? Okay, so like for example, here's that external task, this link to another plan, right? If I'm ready to start tracking this, before I start seeing am I on plan or not, see, this pushed this out to 2015 when I linked it to an external task. Okay, so this plan is 2 years old, and we can see the newer plan. So I want to find out if this plan is baseline. Okay, what view am I in? I'm in a Gantt chart view. I'm on a table called entry. I don't see a table called baseline. I'm going to go to the baseline table. And we can see that this plan has been baselined. Okay, I'm going to apply. Matter of fact, let me go to my other plan. Let's go to the scheduling demo. Let's see if this one's been baseline. More tables, baseline, apply. So as Jim showed on that slide, when you see zeros and NAs, it means that the plan has not been initiated. Now what I did was, I asked a lot of people, have you ever seen a plan be baseline? They say, yeah, what happened? Nothing. I didn't see anything happen. Well, if we put a table in, this is an example of watching the scheduling engine do its thing. Okay, so you can take an object from another plan. I have a baseline table I like better in Project 2. So I'm going to take Project 2. I'm going to look at my tables in Project 2. This is called the organizer. I'm going to have the baseline table and copy it over. If I want to overlay it, yes. Close it. Come back here. Reapply the baseline table. More tables. Baseline apply. And what I did was I added a few more columns out here. And so let's see what happens when I baseline. Project, set baseline, say OK, and all the values in the estimate fields got dropped into the baseline field. Okay? So let's say we're going to track this plan. Okay, let's go to the, I'm going to go back over to the plan number 2, which was set up for the second part of the demo. And what I'm going to have here is, if I change % complete, maybe you double click on it, maybe you change it here on the general tab. Okay, you change that to 50% complete or 25% complete or whatever you look at. I ask you what changed, you say nothing. Okay, so again, the question is, what view do I want to be in? Well, the Gantt chart's okay. If I'm looking at the Gantt chart, I might see this progress. I might see it created a split. Gee, why did it do that? Okay, but what I would encourage you to do is have a table, like maybe something called the tracking table. Now, the tracking table's okay, but I want to see a little bit more. I want to see what happens with remaining work. Okay, I want to see what happens with the estimated date versus the actual date. So I created a new table called My Task Tracking. And I added the start date, the estimated start date. I added the actual work and the remaining work. And let's see what happens when I change the % complete on a task that hasn't started. I'm going to change this to 25% and press enter. And we'll see a number of things just happened. The actual start date became the same as the estimated start date. Is that true? Gee, I don't know. It was just yesterday. It might be true. Maybe it started sooner. Maybe it started later. Maybe it started today. Okay. How about the finish date? Well, it's estimated to finish on the 17th. What if my actual work is 50 hours and my remaining is 70? Okay. What if I change that to 90? What if I change that to 120? Right? So we can start seeing what's going on here. This date keeps moving out. Okay, so one of the things we encourage people to do is to apply a table when you're tracking is meaningful. Now, by the way, you wouldn't put in actual work that way. Hopefully, you would put in actual work by applying work in the lower pane, and we can see the project was very evenly calculating those actuals. That's not usually how actuals come in. They'll come in like 8 hours here and 16 hours here and maybe 22 hours here. And my remaining work's not exactly 40. This one's going to be 60. This one's going to be 23. This one's going to be 11. And now when I say OK, it recalculates everything. Okay, so that's kind of tracking and a flyby. Now, if you were a project server, these would come in as timesheets. Right? I'm just showing you operating within Project Professional. So what's happening is I'm creating variances. I'm going to apply the variance table. I'm going to call my variance table. What's the variance table? Well, here's my start and finish. Here's my baseline. And here's everything that got off kilter. Some things are finishing early. Some things are finishing late. And as Jim said, one of my final things I want to show you is what happens with a proactive variance. What does that mean? I'm going to go to View, More Filters. And I'm going to edit something called the Slipping Task Filter. Click Edit. Actual finish is NA. It hasn't finished yet. Okay, I can do something about tasks that haven't finished yet. Sometimes I have a chance. Baseline is not equal to NA. It has been baseline. The finish is greater than the baseline. By definition, that means it has a variance. Right? If your estimated finish is greater than your baseline finish, you've got a variance. All right? So let's go ahead and apply that table. So what it does now, by the way, it's probably better to go outline and show all tasks. All tasks. Okay, and we can see all the tasks that have a finished variance that are not yet finished. These are the ones I can do something about. Now, there's another problem. Some of my tasks have no variances, but they were scheduled last week, last month, and they haven't started yet. So the last thing I want to show you is this filter called the Start By filter. Should start by. Let's edit that thing first. More filters. Edit the Should Start By filter. ... means it's going to ask you a question. Put in today's date. Show me anything where the actual start has not been filled in, but the scheduled start date is before today. I call them stale tasks. Right? They're in the past. They're scheduled in the past. They haven't started yet. Gee, that's a problem. Okay, so let's go ahead and apply that with today's date. Say OK. I've got a bunch of tasks that were scheduled to start in March, and they have no progress. How do I know they have no progress? Well, I told it to tell me things that have no start date, but what if I insert a column called % complete? They haven't started yet. they haven't started, and they're in the past, this project has a problem. Okay? Because if I change all these tasks, they're going to generate forecasted variances even though they haven't started yet. Okay? So, and then the final thing is just the fact that Project 2013 has this report tab. It has dashboards. Okay? You got burn downs. You've got cost overviews. You've got project overviews. There's a lot of really nice reports out here that we're not going to go through today, but they're out there, and they'll give you really summaries for what the project does. So, Jim, I was supposed to give you 5 minutes. I gave you 2 minutes. I could have gone another 3 hours. Back over to you.
Let's do it. As a seasoned PM, it's all about flexibility. All right. I'm an amateur golfer, and I can't expect to go out and buy a new set of Callaways and play like Phil Mickelson within a week. In a similar way, I challenge project managers out there. You can't expect to buy project management and be a professional in a week or two. You've got to understand the mechanics of how the tool works. You've got to practice, practice, practice. You've got to understand the ins and outs, and really just take a deeper dive and see how this thing works. I think Gus gave you some great insight today into how to look at different views and see what's happening when you make changes to your plan. The more you practice, the better you'll be. So let's move forward. We're a long-time practitioner of implementing Microsoft Project Server, and we apply a standard approach. We call it the project. So I'm going to fly through this pretty quickly. We take a three-phase approach: vision, implement, and adopt. And most of our clients tend to be pretty good at the implement stage, but tend to not maybe devote enough time and attention to either vision or adopt. And we feel that's critical for successful implementation. The vision will provide a roadmap for how you're going to implement the overall project, both in terms of process and or technology. And we are proponents of phasing in functionality, phasing in the processes and the technology that you'll use for the organization over time, really based on the organization's capacity to change and perhaps the amount of resources that are available to implement. We also feel adoption is super important. So once you've gone live with a new process, new technology, how are you managing to make sure that the process or tool is effectively being used as planned? And you can do that through measurement. Again, are we using the process? Are we using it effectively? If not, why not? And you need to get into a mindset of continuous process improvement, continuous technology improvement. That's the only way that you'll really successfully adopt a new tool, a new process, a new technology. project server. Questions and answers.
Yes, we did get one question about, someone asked about earned value based on actuals. Are we where we thought we would be, and if not, what are the reasons for the variance? How do you get all that information in Microsoft Project?
Good question. And the bottom line is, project primarily tracks three things. It tracks labor or work, it tracks cost, and it tracks dates. And so, I showed a brief example of showing variances against dates. Certainly, the work table shows the variances on work. The cost table shows variances on cost, and then, kind of from that point, it becomes project management theory, right? If we see one of the things you can show is actually go to the resource sheet and see it apply the work table and see resources with variances. And I love using that example because I like to ask people, what do you think when a resource has a variance on their work? What's the problem? And project's not going to tell you that. It's going to tell you somebody is exceeding their estimates. And we start double-clicking on it. We find out the skills aren't there. We find out the estimates were made by senior people and given it to junior people. They may have the skills, but they don't have the senior skills. We may see that somebody's delaying somebody, and they're putting time in the project, but it's not productive time. So the root cause analysis is really a step beyond Microsoft Project. That's kind of my fast answer, right? You can add reason fields and all that business, but out of the box, it's about tell me where the variance is, and now let's use the theory of root cause analysis to find out what the problem is.
All right, we had another question come in. Is there a recommendation on limit for how large your project schedule can be?
Oh, good Lord, that's a great question. The limits come in a couple different flavors. Certainly, number of tasks can start to limit. I mean, project doesn't really limit you, but certainly things like memory available to the computer, size of the CPU. So number of tasks, I'm just going to talk about factors. Number of tasks is a factor. Number of custom fields is a factor. Number of assignments per task is a factor. But I've certainly seen, thousands and thousands of tasks work okay. So, unless you're getting into some really esoteric programs and huge project plans, project's going to handle it, especially if you have the hardware to match it.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for staying on late. We do have one more question. If Gus and Jim, you're up for it.
If they're coming in, we'll keep answering them.
All right. How do you compare against baseline when project is revised several times during the life cycle?
That's a great question. So there's a baseline capability I didn't show, but when you go to project set baseline, you can, in fact, choose different baselines. So there's I call the official baseline. Okay, so the official baseline is baseline with no number after it. And am I showing my screen? I'll show it if I can. I'm going to collect the poll. Okay, so I'm going to go to. Am I on? Yeah, no. Okay, that's okay. So if you go to set baseline, basically you're going to drop down to give you 11 baselines. So there are 11 baselines. What we encourage you to do if you re-baseline is move your official baseline, the one that's going to be the old one, move that to baseline 1, okay? And then move your new baseline into the official baseline, because all variances come off of the official baseline. And so basically, using multiple baselines is something you just have to be careful with, because you're going to use your old baseline. That's the one you're going to move out before you do the new baseline.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. If you have any questions, you can send them into D. Cicala, D-C-I-C-A-L-A, at projectassistance.com. I can pass those on, get those answered for you. And again, projectassistance.com/webinar to get the slides, the discount codes we shared, etc. And thank you, everyone.